Why my eyes, sir? You've never used them before.
Incidentally, Gerald Gardner wrote a book titled High Magic's Aid, which was not a work of fiction, but published as such, to protect himself from persecution by the anti-witchcraft laws that were not yet abolished in England. Published in 1949 under his craft name Sire, it tells the story of a young gardener, his brother who was possessed by a demon, and the witch and magician who befriended them. The magical rituals in the book are real, taken partly from the Key of Solomon, MacGregor Mather's translation, and by fellow Golden Dawn member and Magus of the Rosicrucian Society of England, W. Wynne Westcott, of a text from Eliphas Levi titled The Magical Ritual of the Sanctum Regnum. I'd like to read you a couple of excerpts from this book. Listen very carefully here. I want you to get this. The conclusion, by Eliphas Levi, quote, "One last word remains to be said. When the temple is rebuilt, there will be no more sacrifice upon its high places. Glory be to the Christ, who has brought to their completion the symbols of the ancient mysteries, and who has prepared the reign of knowledge by faith. Become a Christian, simple and docile, be a faithful servant of the church, believe, mortify yourself, and obey," end quote. What in the world is Levi saying? To just forget the previous 22 chapters of magical incantations, become a Christian, and be a servant of the church? Which Christ is he speaking of here? Surely not the Christ of the Bible. In a note provided by Westcott, quote, "The very curious manuscript volume, from which the preceding pages have been translated, concludes with a passage which appears to retract the whole of the foregoing instruction. It is a very notable illustration of the second mind of its author. Mr. Waite, who published an English translation of much that Levi has written, has in his preface called special attention to the evidence that Levi was drawn in a most mysterious fashion in two different directions by opposing forces." In a peer-reviewed academic journal titled The Baphomet of Eliphas Levi, Its Meaning and Historical Context, the author explains not just the meaning of Levi's esoteric symbol of the Baphomet, but his devotion to what he calls, quote-unquote, true Catholicism. Quote, "There is a wealth of academic and non-academic literature that points out Levi's intention, a symbolization of the equilibrium of opposites. The meaning and intention of this narrative can only be comprehended if one takes into consideration the ideas that he had propagated in the 1840s under his civil name, Alphonse Louis Constant, when he was known as one of the most notorious socialist radicals. At that time, he claimed to be the representative of the quote-unquote true Catholicism, which he opposed to the corrupted Christianity of the churches, and which he vehemently identified with true socialism. He regarded himself as the latest representative of a long tradition of revolutionary heretics who struggled for the realization of a universal religious association. In the 1850s, he re-signified and elaborated this narrative, now identifying occultism with true Catholicism, and at times more or less explicitly with true socialism. His Baphomet has to be seen as an iconic representation of this true doctrine, as the Knights Templar were considered to be the successors of the very same heretical revolutionary tradition that reached back to the Gnostics of the late ancient school of Alexandria, the environment where the momentous separation between true and false religion supposedly took place. In this light, the Baphomet is not only a magnetistic symbol representing Levi's theory of magic, but first and foremost, an embodiment of the one and only true tradition, whose ultimate goal is the establishment of a perfect social order." End quote. The fundamental idea behind Levi's writings was the existence of a single true tradition that resulted from a primitive revelation. Explaining the meaning of the pentagram that adorns the Baphomet's head, Levi declared that every new cult is just a new route to lead humanity to the one religion, that of the sacred and the radiant pentagram, the sole eternal Catholicism. It has already been indicated that Levi had identified as the representative of quote-unquote true Catholicism since his radical writings of the 1840s, a self-understanding that he constantly articulated in his occultist writings. The major influence on his Catholic identity was the famous priest Félicité de Lamennais, the founder of a so-called neo-Catholic movement that sought to establish a progressive form of Catholicism that was marked by a rationalistic and scientific stance. After spectacularly breaking with Rome, Lamennais turned to a Christian socialism in 1834 that inspired a whole generation of young socialists, including Levi, who was perceived by contemporaries as one of his most radical disciples." End quote.
By Klaus Schwab and the family of international finance find in Bergoglio not a neutral spectator, which would itself already be an unheard of thing, but actually a zealous cooperator who abuses his own moral authority in order to support a destra inside the church the project of the dissolution of traditional society, while ad intra within the church he pursues the project of the demolition of the church in order to replace her with a philanthropic organization of Masonic inspiration.